Now here's our tabletop. Everything is cut out, and I've already gone through the initial processes of popping the grain, just like in our the pencil holder video. I put on a reasonably dark dye, let that absorb and dry. It's a water-based dye. That goes into the deeper pores, and then I sand everything the next day, bring it to this point. That's where we're at right now. It's freshly sanded, and it's ready for the next step. Now, at this point, you can actually do a lot of things with this. You can go to another color. You can go to a sort of a really burgundy reddish color if you wanted to, and it would look gorgeous. You can get crazy and put greens and oranges, whatever you want to do. For me, I'm thinking with the walnut, I want to keep it as close to regular true maple as possible while still highlighting all this excellent grain here. So there's a few things that you can do. You could just go with something like shellac. Okay, this is just regular bullseye seal coat. Doesn't really have much in the way of color, but it will still impart a little bit of an amber hue. You can get a shellac that actually has color in it, something like amber or orange shellac will bring some color to the board. Another thing you can do is just a coat of boiled linseed oil. That has definitely has an amber tone to it, and the oil itself will absorb deep. And a lot of people say that the oil gives the wood this sort of translucent chatoyance, okay? Like the oil basically, here's a good example. You take a paper bag and you wet it down with water, and you just hold it up to the light. It just looks like a wet paper bag. Take a paper bag and put a little bit of oil on it, and now all of a sudden when you hold it up to the light, there's something else going on there, and that's what they call chatoyance. It's the way the oil droplets are giving you a depth in the wood, making you feel like you're seeing more of a three-dimensional object. So the oil is a good option, but I found that you can replicate some of the look, or what our eye sees when we use oil. You could actually use shellac and do the same thing. I just take a little bit of this seal coat and I add a few drops of an alcohol-soluble dye. This is trans tint golden brown. And when I put that on the surface, I find that I get similar results. Now, I don't think you're going to be able to make it all out here, but down here is the shellac with dye. This is shellac alone, and this is boiled linseed oil up here. This is a dye that I was playing with that I didn't like. So, you could just mess around with it a little bit, but you could see these are all relatively close to natural maple, a little bit darker. But I think that's where I want to be. So let's make up some shellac. Okay, so I've got a little shellac here, and let's put a couple drops of this stuff in there. Again, it's golden brown. That's a little more than a few drops, but that'll work. Give it a mix. That's always a good idea to mix with some piece of, some kind of a piece of wood that's a similar color to the wood you're going to be staining, because then you can kind of check the color effect. That looks pretty good. I'm going to start with the bottom first. It's a nice clean cotton t-shirt. Now remember, shellac will dry quickly, so you got to kind of move fast. Not enough. It's really not any time to play around like you do when you're using some varnishes or a wipe-on formula of some sort. Now, if you haven't fallen in love with figured wood yet, you will after you see something like this. I love the side grain of figured boards. That is just almost edible. So delicious. Okay, I'll give that top a few minutes to dry before doing the other side. Now, there are a few properties of shellac that make it one of the greatest materials to work with for woodworkers. Basically, it dries very quickly. Usually you could recoat or proceed with, if you're using it as a sealer, proceed with your regular coats within half an hour to an hour sometimes, depending on the conditions. It's a universal binder. I mean, it's a great sealer. You could put it as a binder between different coats of incompatible materials. It seems to bind to just about everything. Another great thing is, a lot like lacquer, it will redissolve in itself. So when you put on multiple coats, each coat dissolves into the previous coats to actually become one coat. Whereas with varnish, you're just piling everything on. Now, for a really good primer, no pun intended, on shellac, check out Charles Neal's, I believe it's his most recent video. He did a little discussion on shellac and all the great things about it, and apparently we are on the same page as far as shellac goes. So once the shellac dried, I came back with a little bit of 320 grit, just very lightly went over the surface and knocked down anything that was sticking up. And it was pretty smooth to begin with, so there wasn't a whole lot to do. Now I want to start applying the finish of choice. And I kind of went back and forth on this. I thought about playing with the water-based finishes and stuff, and the problem is time. I don't really have the time to play with this. I want to get this video done and out to you guys, and I've got a bunch of other things on the plate that I got to take care of. So I'm going to go with an Old Faithful here. I've got my Seal-A-Cell clear, thinking maybe a coat or two of the Seal-A-Cell, and then a bunch of coats of Armor Seal, or as many as I think is necessary to get the finish I'm looking for. And I really think those oil-based finishes, I mean, there's no doubt about it. Oil is really the way to go when you want to see the grain really pop. Now, the other finishes, I find that we're trying to catch up and find ways of making them look kind of like an oil finish, but there's no doubt that oil is one of the best ways to accomplish that. So, to also speed things up, it'd be really nice if I could finish both sides at the same time, wouldn't it? So, I've got one of my steel dowels inserted into the board, and I've got another hole in this scrap piece of wood. Drop it in, and look at that. I could finish all sides at the same time, and it'll dry with a good amount of air exposure on all sides of the board. Cool. All right, here is the table with the top in place, and I just want to show you very quickly how I'm going to secure the top. Okay, the stainless steel dowels are going into each one of the grooves, right? And I've cut these little, well, it's a sandwich of maple and walnut with a groove cut out so that I could slide it in place, and it still gives this dowel some room to move if the wood decides to expand. And it'll seal it up, make it look like it's a little crazy little inlay. Now all of our little pieces are glued in place. I used epoxy, and I got a little bit of a mess here to deal with, but I'm going to flush everything with a block plane on the top here, and then I've got my flush trim saws, chisel, whatever it takes, some sandpaper, just to make sure I get everything down so it's nice and flush. And I've already done one right here. Okay, you can kind of get an idea of where this is going. Okay? Moving on. Going with the Old Faithful, my oil-based Seal-A-Cell clear. Okay, so I'm going to put a single coat of this on there, and we'll see where it goes. Not 100% sure, probably do the Armor Seal top coat. Nothing real shiny, nothing real heavy, just a little bit of protection. I really want a close to the wood sort of finish. Whoop, you know what? I forgot something big. These dowels will not look very good if they have gooped up finish on them, so this is a job for some blue tape. All right, here we go. And of course, as always, take your finish and get a secondary container so you don't expose your finish to oxygen any longer than you have to, and it will keep the stock material much cleaner if you're not dipping back and forth into it. So here we go. It's amazing how this walnut just comes to life as soon as it gets that first taste of finish. It's gorgeous stuff. This first coat, I'm not really looking to create a layer necessarily. I just want this stuff to absorb nice and deep, so I rub it in and just keep moving. The wood at this stage is really, really thirsty, so it's really gonna suck it in pretty fast. You know, there are just some points in the woodworking process where you get that sort of gratification for what you do. I know a lot of turners who really enjoy turning because there's an immediate gratification, or certainly a much quicker gratification than building furniture pieces. And I completely understand that. I'm just scared to death of a bowl exploding after I put hours of work into it, so I don't really turn that often. But With these furniture pieces, you know, I can predict a little bit more what's going to happen. I can recover from mistakes a little bit better. But when you go through this whole process and you finally get to this point where you're putting the finish and you're seeing your work piece, in this case, is a little longer than I normally would have taken for a project like this, but this is a month or two of work that has gone into this piece. All the conversations I've had with people about the table, you know, this is where you just see the piece come to life. Once that finish gets on it and you start to realize, you know, why you're doing this. And it's just one of those kind of hard to explain moments, but I think a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's just hard to put words on. But it's one of those things that makes you want to run into the house and show your family or call your friends or email some pictures to the wood whisperer. You know, it's just one of those moments that I'm having right now. So I figured it's a good thing to capture. And this walnut is just so, I don't know, it just looks like food. Some kind of cake or something. A delicious Hostess cake, maybe. Maybe Entenmann's, I don't know. Now, the other thing to remember with a piece of furniture like this, I can probably bet, and I really haven't shown the final decision for the top. I really haven't shown that to many people yet. I would just about guarantee, like any decent piece of furniture that goes out on a limb, half of you are going to hate it, half of you are going to love it. And that's just kind of the way these things go. And that's what happens when you go beyond the norm. And it's a little hard to accept at first, but then you just kind of start to expect it. The key to anything with these designs, as far as I'm concerned, you know, mission style and arts and crafts style, those are things that are almost universally acceptable. Everybody likes them, you know, to some degree. And I don't think anybody would be ashamed to have a nice mission style, you know, chest of drawers in their house, or you know, coffee table or end table. You know, it's very, there's a mass appeal to it, let's say. Stuff like this, definitely not a mass appeal. Not everybody will like it. In fact, some people will hate it. That's just the way things go. But the key is, with any of your furniture, if you're going to do these sort of different designs and really play around with the concept of design, be prepared for that, but understand that that means you've done something right. I think your work, or any art for that matter, should elicit an emotion. Whether it's, ooh, I hate that, or oh, that's fantastic. You're making people think, you know, and if they look at your furniture and have no emotion and just go, oh, that's all right, then that's not a victory for you. Okay, so obviously we want more people to look at it and say that they love it than hate it. But for me, I would rather have emotion than no emotion. So, and that's the way it is. We don't all, you know, like the same colors. We don't wear the same clothes. We don't drive the same cars. Why should we all have the same taste in furniture and design, you know? So it's not offensive to me if you don't like my furniture. It just means you don't like my furniture. You know, we have different tastes. It's not a big deal. And I will let this sit overnight before I touch it again. Well, it seems like we've been working on this guy forever, but here it is. Probably have one or two more coats to put on the top, and that's why you'll see I still have the blue tape on the steel dowels. Basically, a couple coats of seal cell, sanding in between coats lightly with 320. Then when I start applying the armor seal, semi-gloss, I put you know, maybe a 400 grit sanding in between the first one and a 600 after that, and then the final coat. So it's looking a little thin. I may want a little more protection because it's going to be in my living room, and I know how my wife is with coffee cups and things like that. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, so overall, the impression of the piece, it's very interesting for me to see the evolution, because this is not at all what I had envisioned in the beginning. I mean, the legs are, the weight of the piece is, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with the top. I said in the last episode, I said glass because it was kind of a default solution. I didn't know what else to do. And then once I was inspired to do the top this way, that all of a sudden became enough of a feature that I liked it so much that I didn't feel compelled to worry about this inner meeting of the four dovetails. It wasn't as important to me because the top really speaks for itself. Okay, so that's why I sort of abandoned the idea of glass. And also, I liked all the suggestions people were giving me for ways that I could put a little little, maybe a circular piece of glass or something that allows people to kind of look through and see the dovetails. Cool idea, but I really just didn't think it was necessary at this stage. I wasn't as hung up on those dovetails as I was previously. So the top itself is able to expand and contract because of oversized dowel holes, and everything's nice and secure. I've got the little filler pieces in for that groove that we created at the top of the legs, and I mean, I gotta say, I'm really happy with the way it came out. It's got a silky smooth finish, and you know, it is what it is. Let's talk a little bit specifically about some of the problems that I confronted and how I solved them, and then how they actually became part of the final design. Now, the top, as we saw, goes into the sides and has those inlay pieces. Now, that's another good example. A lot of times with this type of process, if you're not exactly a really creative person, or at least you don't think you're a creative person, and I fall into that category, I challenge myself on purpose, because I don't necessarily look at the final piece or draw it on a piece of paper and know every little detail that's going to be in that final piece. But if I start, when I still have a lot of questions left to answer, even if I paint myself into a corner, the way I get myself out of that situation then becomes my creative opportunity. So I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I get most creative when I have to solve a problem, not when there's no problem. I'm just trying to come up with a creative adornment to the piece. So, you know, I don't know, maybe that's just me, but it's worked for me in the past on probably, you know, 8 or 10 different projects that I've done like this. So the biggest example of that in this piece are the inlay pieces here where the dowels go in. Clearly, when I routed that groove, I had to fix that. I had to put a repair there. But instead of just filling it with walnut and try to pretend that it's not there, I did that double sandwich of 2 pieces of maple and a strip of walnut in the center. You know, and now that just becomes part of the design feature. Even from the outside, it just looks really cool. So someone who doesn't know any better might come up and look at this and go, oh, interesting choice there. It really wasn't a choice at all. It was a way to get myself out of a bind. Now here's another thing. For the top itself, I stressed over that for a while. I finished it and then had to strip it down and refinish it. I wasn't happy with the way it was coming out. It was either too blonde or I wound up going too dark. So I would say, and I think the guys in the chat room that particular day that watched me do this saw me go through this about 2 or 3 times until I finally arrived at the result that I wanted. But 2 things came out of that. Number 1, the top now has a lot of depth. It's got, you know, sort of more going on. It almost looks older than it really is. And the reason is because the stain, or the dye actually, that I used had penetrated so deep that even when I refinished it and pulled it off, there was still some that sat in the really, really deep pores. But what that actually did was made the piece look older than it was, a little worn, a little earthy, for lack of a better term than that. And I like that. I think it works really well with these sort of tree branch looking legs. I think it fits the theme really well. The other thing that it did was because I had to sand it down so many times, it actually thinned the top down a lot more than my original top. And let me show you, this is my backup piece that was going to, this was going to bail me out if I screwed that up enough. Okay, and it's another piece of figured maple, and look how thick it is. Now that thickness, this is the same as what this one was originally. I don't think that that would have looked right. I think it would have been too heavy, too substantial of a top, and I think it would have been a mistake. And once it's glued in place, there's not a whole lot I could do about that. So what wound up being, you know, really a day of hell trying to get this thing to look the way I wanted it to look, turned out to create a situation that actually improved the piece. And now when I stand back and I look at the proportions, you know, this is a little bit closer to a 1/2 inch, probably a little proud of a 1/2 inch. I'm really, really happy with how thin that top is. I think it just lightens up the top a little bit. So again, this is just, you know, me describing how I work. This may not work for everybody, but I honestly have come up with so many creative ideas that people think that that was part of the master plan, when in fact it was a solution to a problem. Now, a couple weeks ago, I was talking with Neil over at Furnitology, and he requested that I take the time to discuss what I may have done differently on this. And you know, that's an extremely valuable thing to do, and I'm more than happy to do it, because in a piece like this, you do learn a lot of lessons, and you will challenge yourself big time. I mean, if you get through a piece of furniture that you're building for yourself or to sort of broaden your scope of skills, and you don't feel like you were challenged, you didn't sweat the entire time, you didn't have a couple sleepless nights trying to figure out what the heck you were going to do, then I think I don't want to say that you wasted your time at all. I mean, it's still practicing your building skills, but I think you do need to challenge yourself. And if you're not really pushing the limits. Okay, so if you don't step out of your comfort zone, you're never really going to learn. And a lot of times I've found the best way to learn quickly is to go head first and throw yourself right into the fire. And what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. That whole concept. So the things that I would do differently in this piece, first of all, this was sized to fit in a particular place in my house where there isn't a lot of room. It needed to be kind of a compact form here. What I would do is probably make the stance a little wider, make the table a little taller. I want more space in between these legs. There's points when I look at it that visually the legs are too crowded. I probably would lengthen this stretcher piece here to give me a little bit more space there. Visually, like I said, when I step away from it, there's certain angles that I see it that it looks okay, but then there's other ones that I see it and I'm like, I wish there was a little bit more room to play with there. So that might be the first thing that I would do, is broaden that stance a little bit. Secondly, I would probably rethink what I did in the center. Again, I never remember the people who give me these suggestions, but it was a good one. Someone suggested bringing that centerpiece, making it thicker. And I don't know if I can even explain this properly, but making the centerpiece thicker and then using that extra material, carving that out as part of the design in the middle, which would have made it a little bit more substantial at the center point. Probably would have done that, and it would have given me more meat for the dovetail to grab onto. Speaking of the dovetails, I probably would have made them through. If they were through dovetails, I would have had the luxury of seeing those dovetails from the bottom if I wanted to, instead of just from the top. And in reality, the way this piece is constructed, there's not enough weight on any of this table to necessitate a stopped dovetail. Now, in theory, it's fine because that's the way gravity's working. Okay, you put a stopped dovetail there, and it's good to know that technique. But I don't think it's necessary. I think a through dovetail with some glue on it would have been fine. No problem there at all. And, well, the top is a good question. I might come up with a different way to do the top. I don't think you need to have this inlay up there. Again, great creative solution, but not necessarily necessary. So maybe drill the dowel holes before, assemble the whole thing in one shot so it's all together, and then you just have a complete seamless integration of these two pieces together without this inlay piece. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming on this little furniture building journey with me. It was quite an adventure, and I hope you learned something, because I know I did. These are always great learning experiences, and if I can take you along that journey with me, I'm going to. Future episodes, I don't know exactly what we've got planned. There's just sky's the limit. There's so much that we want to do and only so much time to do it in. So stay tuned for some more great episodes. And if you haven't been to the website in a while, there are a lot of things going on there. We're always adding stuff. So check out thewoodwhisperer.com for that. And if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at thewoodwhisperer@gmail.com. So until next time, I think I am going to kick back, enjoy the rest of my Dr. Pepper, and lose myself in the beauty of my latest creation.